In my family's eyes, I have always been the one who chose wrong. Wrong city, wrong career, wrong priorities. My mother said it nicely. You've always marched to your own drummer, sweetheart. But my father never bothered with the nice version. I was 31 years old, standing in the departures hall at Toronto Pearson, on a Friday morning in October, watching my father hand boarding passes to my brother and his wife, like he was distributing inheritances. He had flown us all out from different cities. My brother from Vancouver, me from Ottawa, to attend my cousin's wedding in St. John's, Newfoundland. A family reunion dressed up as a celebration. My father reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. The camel wool one he'd had since before I was born. The one he wore to signal that money was a thing he'd had long enough to stop thinking about. And he produced a third boarding pass. He held it out toward me without looking up from his phone. Economy, he said, almost as an afterthought. It's a short flight. You'll survive. My brother was already glancing down at his own pass. Business class. I could see the seat number from where I was standing. Dad, you said yourself you don't care about that kind of thing. He finally looked at me then, with that particular expression he'd perfected over 3 decades. Fond and dismissive at the same time, like he was indulging a child who'd said something naive. You're a public servant. You people don't expect much. You people. Like I was a category. Like 31 years of being his daughter had sorted me neatly into a demographic he'd already evaluated and moved past. I took the boarding pass. I folded it once and put it in my coat pocket. I didn't say anything because I had learned, slowly, painfully, over many years, that saying anything only gave him more material. My sister-in-law looped her arm through my brother's and steered them both toward the Air Canada Maple Leaf Lounge. My mother touched my shoulder as she passed. He doesn't mean it the way it sounds, she said. She always said that I should explain what my father believes, because it matters for everything that comes after. He built a real estate development company from nothing, starting in the late 80s, when you could still buy land in the Annapolis Valley for almost nothing, and sell it for something. By the time I was in high school, we lived in a house with a name, Bellhaven. And he drove a Land Rover and sat on the board of the regional hospital. He gave money to causes he approved of and withheld it from people he didn't. And he had a genius for making both feel like moral positions rather than personal ones. He believed, genuinely, I think, not cynically, that success was legible, that you could read it on a person. The watch, the car, the postal code, the carrier on your phone plan. He'd grown up with nothing and had decided that the cure for nothing was everything and that people who settled for less simply hadn't tried hard enough. I was the person in his family who was settled for less. I worked for the federal government. I'd done my undergrad at Dalhousie, then a master's in public administration at Carleton. And for the past 4 years, I had been a senior policy analyst with the Privy Council office in Ottawa. I was good at my job. I found it meaningful. I did not drive a Land Rover. I had also, for the last 18 months, held a secondment position that I was not permitted to discuss publicly. Not in the way people say I can't talk about it to seem interesting at dinner parties. I mean, I had signed legal agreements, specifying what I could and could not disclose, and I took those agreements seriously. And so my family knew nothing about it. My father knew I worked for the government. He knew my salary, approximately, because at Christmas 3 years ago, he had looked up the Federal Public Service pay scales on his phone at the dinner table and announced what he found to the room. He knew I rented a 1-bedroom apartment near the Glebe and that I did not own property, which he brought up with the frequency other parents bring up grandchildren. He did not know anything else. And I had not corrected him, because I had watched what happened when I tried to correct him about smaller things, and I was tired. The flight to St. John's was 2 hours and 40 minutes. I sat in 24C, between a university student with noise-canceling headphones and a retired teacher from Prince Edward Island who told me about her grandchildren. It was actually a very pleasant flight. The wedding was at a hotel in downtown St. John's, one of those converted heritage buildings that the tourism board loves. Exposed stone, low ceilings, views of the harbor. My cousin Ingrid was marrying a man named Patrick, who worked in marine biology and laughed at everything she said, which seemed like a good foundation. My father had booked a block of rooms for the family. Mine was on the 3rd floor, standard queen, overlooking the parking structure. My brother's suite had a harbor view. I had stopped expecting anything different by the time I was 12, so this didn't particularly bother me. The room was clean and the shower had good pressure, and I had brought a book. The rehearsal dinner was the night before the wedding, in a private dining room off the main restaurant. My father had paid for it, which meant he also controlled the seating arrangement, which meant I was at the far end of the table, next to my great-aunt Sylvie, who was 91 and had been reliably hostile to me since I broke a piece of her carnival glass at age 7. My brother sat at my father's right hand. His wife sat between them. They ordered the lamb. My father gave a toast that lasted 11 minutes. I counted. It was about family legacy and what it meant to build something that lasted, and about how proud he was to see the next generation carrying that forward. He looked at my brother when he said it. He looked at Ingrid and Patrick. His eyes passed over me, the way they pass over background details in a photograph. Registered, then moved on. Beautiful speech, my great-aunt Sylvie told him. Your cousin turned out well, she told me by way of contrast. I drank my wine. It was a Tidal Bay from Nova Scotia, which I recognized because I actually pay attention to those things, and it was very good. And I focused on that. The morning of the wedding, I got a call. I had been expecting it loosely. The timing wasn't a complete surprise, but I hadn't known exactly when, and I certainly hadn't known it would land at 9:47 on a Saturday morning. When I was eating toast in a hotel room in St. John's wearing the fluffy robe that hotels provide as a courtesy to people who didn't pack well. The call was from my assistant, a young man with me for 8 months, and was extremely competent and occasionally too formal for a Saturday. I'm sorry to reach you on the weekend, he said. The confirmation just came through. They need you at CFB Gagetown by Monday morning for the advance briefings. The minister's office wants the full team assembled tonight. Salsi tip my toast. Can you get me a car from St. John's to Gagetown? I've already arranged it. There's a government flight out of CYYT at 4 this afternoon. It'll connect you to Fredericton. A driver will meet you at the airport. I thanked him. I hung up. I ate the rest of my toast. Then I opened my suitcase and looked at the thing I had folded carefully at the bottom, under 2 changes of clothes and a paperback novel. My dress uniform. I had brought it because I always bring it on trips of more than 2 days, now, the same way I always carry my identification. Force of habit, an acknowledgement that the job does not pause for weekends or family occasions or cousins' weddings in Newfoundland. I hung it on the back of the bathroom door and got in the shower. The wedding ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon. I sat in the 4th row on the bride's side, next to a woman named Constance, who had been Ingrid's roommate at Memorial University, and cried through the entire vows in the best possible way. Ingrid looked genuinely happy. Patrick kept touching her hand like he was reassuring himself. She was real. It was one of the nicest weddings I've ever attended. And I've attended several as a matter of professional necessity in recent years. So I have a reference point. My father sat in the front row. I watched him from behind during the ceremony. The set of his shoulders. The way he leaned over to say something to my mother during the ring exchange. The small proprietary satisfaction he seemed to take in the whole proceedings, as though he had arranged them himself. He had not arranged them. Ingrid's parents had arranged them. But he had a gift for absorbing credit without appearing to ask for it. At the reception, my father found me near the bar. You clean up all right, he said, which was his version of a compliment about my dress, a forest green wrap thing I had bought specifically for this trip. Thank you. Still, no +1? He said it lightly, the way he said most things that weren't light at all. No, he looked around the room with the expression of a man surfacing real estate. Your brother's firm is expanding into the Ottawa market, you know. He could probably use someone with your... A brief pause that did a lot of work. Government contacts. I looked at my drink. I'm happy where I am, I said. He made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite disagreement. Something in between. Designed to let me know that he considered this statement to be evidence of the very problem he was describing. I just think, he said, that you have potential you haven't done much with. It's a shame to spend the best years grinding away in some office for a government pension. I don't think of it as grinding. No, he said. I know you don't, he said it. The way you'd say bless your heart in the Maritimes if you were being unkind about it. Then someone called his name from across the room and he went. And I stood there with my drink and my dress and my government pension, and I thought, not for the first time. He has no idea. At 4:15, I checked my watch. Tobias had said 4 o'clock for the car. I had made my excuses to Ingrid. She understood. She knew what I did. She was one of the only people in my family who did, and I had gone upstairs to change. It takes me approximately 8 minutes to put on my dress uniform correctly. I have timed it. There are 7 components and an order of operations. And I've done it often enough now that my hands know what to do before my brain has finished the instruction. The medals go on last. I still feel something when I pin them on. Not pride exactly, more like weight. Acknowledgement. This is what the last several years have added up to. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The car was waiting outside. A black Government of Canada fleet vehicle, the kind that doesn't advertise itself. The driver, a young corporal from Gagetown, was standing by the door. He straightened when he saw me. The lobby of the hotel opened into the courtyard where the cocktail hour was still going, and I had to pass through it to reach the front entrance. I did not plan what happened next. I walked through the courtyard, past the tall heaters and the tables of charcuterie and the clusters of guests holding champagne flutes, and somewhere in that passage, my father looked up from a conversation he was having with my uncle. And he saw me. Not me in a green wrap dress. Not me, the public servant, the one who'd settled. Me in a dark blue dress uniform with gold braid on the shoulders and 8 years of commendations on my chest, walking through his daughter's wedding reception toward a government car that was waiting for me on the street. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. I kept walking. My brother saw me from across the courtyard. His wife put down her champagne glass. I heard my father say something. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone, which was a tone I had never heard from him before, a kind of stalled uncertainty. And then Tobias, who had come in with the corporal, said, clearly and correctly, because Tobias is always correct, "Ma'am, the vehicle is ready when you are. The minister's office confirms wheels up at 16:40. I paused, just for a moment. Not for effect, or maybe a little for effect, I'll be honest, because I am human and I had just sat through 11 minutes of a toast that didn't mention my name. I turned back to look at my father. He was standing very still. The conversation around him had quieted in the way conversations quiet when something has shifted, and no one has quite caught up yet. Tell the minister's office I'm on my way, I said to Tobias. Then I walked out. The drive to CYYT took 22 minutes. I watched St. John's go past the window. The colorful row houses, the harbor coming in and out of view, the particular gray gold of Newfoundland afternoon light that I've always found beautiful in a way that's hard to put into words. I had my phone out and was reading briefing notes, but I looked up every few minutes. I did not hear from my father until Sunday evening. I was already at CFB Gagetown by then, in a temporary office that smelled like industrial cleaner and coffee, from a pot that had been on since morning. My phone buzzed while I was reviewing a document. I didn't know. He had written, I owe you an apology. Call me when you can. I read it twice. I set the phone down. I picked it back up and read it a third time, because I wanted to make sure I was reading it accurately and not adding words that weren't there. I didn't know. 4 words. He was right about that. He didn't know. Because I hadn't told him. Because every time I had tried to tell him anything about my actual life, he had reclassified it into whatever category he'd already decided I belonged to. He didn't know, because knowing would have required him to be curious about a version of me he'd already dismissed. I called him back the next evening after the first day of briefings, sitting in my car in the parking lot outside the mess, because I wanted some air. I didn't realize, he said when he answered. He sounded different, quieter. What it was, what you'd been doing. I know. Your mother looked it up. Your position. He paused, and I could tell he was choosing words carefully in a way he didn't usually bother to. The scope of it. It's a senior role, I said. I've been in it for 18 months. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was complicated. It involved security clearances, yes, but it also involved something older and less official. The exhaustion of trying to explain yourself to someone who's already decided who you are. The calculation you make at some point, where you stop spending energy on a door that won't open and you put that energy somewhere else instead. I tried a few times, I said. It didn't really go anywhere. Silence the boarding pass, he said. At Pearson. It's fine. It wasn't. Another pause. It wasn't fine. The things I said. The way He stopped. Started again. I've been measuring you against things that don't apply. I see that. I sat with that for a minute. Outside, a group of personnel was walking across the parking lot, talking about something, laughing. The October air was cold enough to see my breath. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't entirely okay. And we have spent enough time in this family performing forgiveness we can actually finish to arriving at. But I also didn't hold it over him. Because what would that accomplish? Exactly. We were both still here. He was 70 years old, and he was calling me from whatever room in the Belhaven he'd retreated to after a wedding, where he'd watched his daughter walk through a courtyard and not recognized her. And I could hear in his voice that something had shifted in a way that couldn't be unshifted. I appreciate you calling, I said. I'm proud of you. He said it plainly, without the qualifications he usually added. I don't think I've said that right. I should have said it better. You can say it better going forward, I said. He was quiet for a moment, then, yeah, I can. There's a verse I've thought about often, in the years since I started this work. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. My grandmother kept it on a cross-stitch on her kitchen wall in Antigonish, and I thought it was generic when I was young, the kind of thing you print on a tea towel. I understand it differently now. Dignity is not something anyone gives you. My father couldn't give it to me by putting me in business class, and he couldn't take it away by not. It was there in the economy seat at 24C, and it was there in the dress uniform, and it was there in my one-bedroom apartment in the Glebe, where I eat cereal for dinner sometimes and read policy documents at 11 at night. And genuinely, honestly, do not feel like I have settled for anything. My brother called me a week after the wedding. He wanted to know how I was. He said the family had talked and they understood now and they were sorry. I thanked him. I meant it. Ingrid sent me a photo from the reception. Someone had taken it without my knowing. One of those candid shots a photographer gets when they're paying attention. I'm mid-stride, walking through the courtyard. My uniform is sharp. My chin is up. Behind me, slightly blurred but visible, my father is standing with his mouth open. I keep it on my phone, not out of spite. Just because sometimes you need to look at the moment when the story changed.